welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of a horror novel that robbed me of sleep this weekend in all the best ways. It is such a good ride, and I am so excited to talk about this book today. So, welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Neena Viel. I'm the author of Listen to Your Sister. And you should know, once I knew I was going to be sitting down on this podcast, I've been so obnoxious, like at my house. I'm like, you want me to load the dishwasher? Don't you know I'm going to be on Turn the Page? So, like, I'm kind of a big deal now. Do I have to walk the dog? But Listen to Your Sister is a speculative horror novel about three siblings really struggling to make their way after the oldest sibling, Kala, becomes the guardian of her teenage brothers. And like a lot of new parents, Kala's not getting much sleep. Only what's keeping her up at night are these horrible recurring nightmares. And when all hell breaks loose at a protest and the siblings are forced to go on a run to a remote cabin in the woods, her brothers will learn the hard way. They really, really should have listened to their sister.
Yeah, really should have. I love if we could start by talking about your journey to the book. I'm always interested in inception points. Like, did this book start with a character or an image or a feeling? Like, where did it grow from?
Certainly a whole bucket of feelings. So there's a little bit of this book, of course, that's true. So I ended up suddenly taking care of my teenage brother, and it completely turned my life upside down. Sometimes, I really wanted to talk about this feeling of, you know, loving someone so much, but also you sometimes want to put them in a volcano, and there's no one who's able to provoke those feelings quite like family.
Absolutely. The family dynamics here feel so real and so lived in. And, as someone myself, I was never a guardian, but I am 12 years older than my younger half brother. And there is something really strange about being in that space that is like 50% sibling and 50% guardian or parentified figure. And that could be really confusing to navigate. And I think that's something that this book does so well.
Well, thank you for saying that. And that's definitely something that I wanted to convey through this book. There's so many expectations that we place on especially older siblings and especially women and especially Black women. We're supposed to do so much labor. I have an older brother also, but no one ever expected him to change a diaper, right? Like he's outside playing basketball and I'm inside with all this stuff. Like, wait, why? It's not like I have any information about caretaking, that he doesn't have. But that's the expectation that women should naturally be slotted into these slots and be mature before our years. And we don't get to play as much. I hope that this is a part of the book that really speaks to a lot of people who have kind of done this kind of caretaking. I still remember how extremely shocked I was in school when I was like, people are paying you to babysit? Like you get money to do this? That's crazy.
Man, I need a union, right? Like,
Right, right.
I'd love if we could talk a little bit more about the dynamic between Kala, Dre, and Jamie, because I really do love like both their, relationships in between individuals and then like as a trio. It does a really good job of like capturing how different sibling relationships can be, and how different like the totality of the three can even be from I hope I'm making like even a lick of sense right now as I say this, but like how did you go about, I guess, capturing like each of their unique voices and creating those relationships, if that makes sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. I think we all relate very a little bit differently depending on the person that we're with, and even within families, we can have totally different relationships. You can have siblings that grew up in the same house and spent all of this time together with the same parents, but yet somebody's close with mom and somebody's close with dad and somebody feels left out, and as adults, it's always interesting when you're talking with your family and you're like, I remember that completely different, and you were the one who was spoiled and everyone did this, and everybody is correct to some degree because our perception is just going to be influencing our perspective so much. And so, yes, even with three siblings like I've created in this book who are in some ways many very, very close, but in other ways they're complete strangers to each other because there are parts of themselves that, they're not going to be showing to each person equally. So for Kala and Dre, they have a shorter age gap. They're only 2 years apart. So the way that they talk to each other, it's a lot more like approaching a peer, because with the 2 year age gap, you're not doing the same amount of caretaking. Whereas the distance between Kala and her baby brother, Jamie, that's 8 years. So she's not talking to him like a peer, she's in mother mode. She's telling him to eat his vegetables and wash his laundry. So she's not allowed to be as fun as she is with her middle brother, which, and y'all know how middle children are, okay? So Dre's character really is starting from this place of, wanting to relate to Jamie, but he's not in quite the same parent role as Kala is. He wants to be supportive to Kala, but he doesn't feel like he has the same importance in her life as Jamie. And so, that stretch kind of on both ends. And then you have Jamie who, he a teen. So he is he's trying to figure himself out and he's trying to express himself. And when it was my time to do that kind of parenting, and I read all these books and I talked to the therapists, and they would say things like, testing boundaries is age appropriate. And this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. This is such a key time for human development, and I'm like, can he do his development somewhere else? Because this is foolishness.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really hard, I think, when that boundary is blurred between like sibling or parental figure. That's a gray area that can kind of be manipulated, especially by a teen that is testing the waters, crossing boundaries, stuff like that. Like, because you can relate to the person as a sibling when it is convenient, but then as a parental figure when it is convenient. And I think there's a lot of really interesting leveraging of the types of relationships between people that you see in this trio. I'd love if we could talk about how that relates to the novel's supernatural elements. I'm going to be super vague in my questions so that you can like reveal whatever you are comfortable revealing, because I am so afraid of spoiling things for people.
I appreciate your consideration.
Thanks. So, how do you approach connecting like the inner journey of the characters in their relationships and as individuals with like the sort of the external horrors that are also like challenging them while that's happening?
Absolutely. So one thing is, of course, I'm a rabid horror fan, love horror, love thriller, love suspense in all forms, but I have a particular love for horror when it is something external that is synced up with something internal from that character. So not just horror for horror's sake, because as we all know, some of the most nightmarish scenarios are really stemming out of fears that we have in our everyday lives. I'm walking to my car in a dark parking lot and I'm like, what could happen? Anything could happen. I'm terrified. And so this was really kind of my starting point for the supernatural horrors and Listen to Your Sister. Kala, since becoming the guardian of her brother, she's plagued with anxiety. She has this new awareness. There's this running undercurrent, no matter what she's doing, of where is Jamie? Is he safe? Is he okay? And as readers will discover, she has plenty of reasons to believe that he isn't at all possible times, because of how he's pushing boundaries and trying to find himself in some of the wrong ways and making mistakes. But with the pressures of being a guardian, it's her job to hopefully help him be safe while he figures out a way to be himself without placing himself in danger. And as we all know, that's a full-time unpaid job that is just relentless. And so that was really the starting point for that horror, was the idea of this anxiety, and all of these new fears that have been unlocked. That was a part of what it was like for me, when I was doing my caretaking, was scenarios that I never had a reason to be afraid of before were suddenly popping to my head. And that it's probably not rational, right? Like, oh, he's late home from school. he's probably not in a ditch, right? Like he's probably fine. The bus was probably late. But there's the, 0.001 chance that that's not the case. And I think this is probably a feeling that parents are probably always familiar with. There's just always that awareness of where their child is and what their child could be doing and what trouble they could be getting into. And that was the piece that I wanted to capture with Kala that really feeds into the nightmare. The fear of when your phone rings at 2 a.m. and you're just like, this can't be anything good, and your stomach just completely drops out. And just wondering and being feeling so incapable once you realize you're not just responsible for yourself. There's just the vastness of this world. And really, no one can totally protect another person. So it's really an unrealistic expectation in the first place that Kala would be able to completely shield either of her brothers from the everyday dangers that a Black man is going to face in this society.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up because there is an extent to which Callous fears are the sort of like universal fear of any parental figure or guardian that like a child or a young adult in your care is going to be hurt somehow or taken from you. And that is amplified because Calla is a young Black woman who's taking care of a young Black man who is navigating a society in which that's really hard to do. And so there are scenes in this book that touch on very timely and very topical things like the protest that you mentioned and how that is a catalyst for so much that happens. So can you talk a little bit about your approach to um, horror as either like social critique or as yeah, I guess a social critique or like commentary on society?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think when we're talking about horror as social critique, the reason why it feels timely is very frustrating. I wrote this book several years ago now, and I even thought now, like, I would love to be in a place where this concept would feel dated, but it doesn't because it feels, unfortunately, extremely timeless in terms of how Black people are still interacting with the world. And that goes quadruple if you're young and you don't have a lot of power and you don't have financial backing. And there's just so many things, that we can be lacking when we're experiencing the world. And so I think, my approach to this is really to, stemming from real life situations, and how these characters would be interfacing with them from their unique perspectives. Jamie knows probably he has some level of awareness that he should probably pump the brakes on some of the decisions, but he still has this inner pull to again express himself and experimenting and all of these things. And it's just unfortunate that it is happening at a time where the risks for participating and the cost that he's going to have to pay is just so much higher than if he wasn't a Black child. And that, of course, is going to be really weighing down on Kala and Dre in terms of their roles as older siblings, where they each have to deal with their own individual trauma, but then still also try to be in these like protective roles. And I think when it comes to the social critique that this book is trying to point out, it's not just about the parentification that so often happens to our darling big sisters, but the understanding that, it's not just Jamie who would be struggling with the aftermath of the events in this book, or it's not just Jamie that has a lot to fear when he's walking around being Black of all things. Kala has kind of her own internalization and issues that she should be working on, but she's in a position where she's unable to because she's constantly taking care of him. And I think this is really just kind of a little micro element of the conversation that's happening in society as a whole. Black women, we are the backbones of our families and our communities and our workplaces. And we're supposed to be forgiving at all times. And we're always supposed to be extra, extra strong. We're not supposed to be tired, but we should let strangers rest their heads on our bosoms when they need, that little extra Black magic, instead of doing what we want to do, which is burn it all down, because sometimes you get the sense that the places that we're showing up don't really deserve this labor.
Mm. Yes. Yeah, and it feels so relevant just with also it feels of a piece with the pressure placed on Black women to save the country in elections, and to turn out and things like that. And all that pressure is just so much. And I think it's I love it being explored through really three separate POVs because I think it allows you to play with like empathy and sympathy with different people at different times, if that makes sense. I think that there's a lot of emotional complexity of the like the social situations as well as like the domestic situation that just given so much nuance because you have these three perspectives that aren't like competing but are adding nuance to each other.
Well, I hope so. That was the goal, you know?
Let me see. Question. Oh, so something I'd love to talk about too is combining horror with humor. Because it's also very funny in places. A lot of the humor emerges from like the lived-in relationship between the siblings because like they have a lifetime of shared references and in-jokes and like ritual teasing and all these types of things. So I'd love to hear about how you use humor for like character and relationships but also like to manipulate tension and perhaps horror, if that makes sense too.
It does make sense. So I love horror comedy. I think comedy and horror have, such a symbiotic relationship, and they're both really important. And for me, part of what I would like to do, I think I kind of a little bit of an epiphany years ago, watching some stand up on Netflix. I don't know what happened, but at some point I noticed I'm like, these monologues are pretty sad. Isn't this supposed to be funny? But then when the joke eventually came, I was almost laughing more than the joke warranted because I was just so relieved to have a place to put all that tension. And that helped me think about horror in a different way. It's really a stressful experience to maintain tension, for the duration of an entire novel. And so I really like to play with, pulling and releasing it and pulling and releasing it so that readers have that place to break and breathe. And I really think it's through, comedy that also characters can really come alive. We learn so much about people through what they're afraid of, but we also learn a lot about them through what makes them laugh and the ways that they seek to bring humor to others. And so, all the little jokes in there, and you should know a lot of the things that were trimmed were like extra jokes. It's all my deleted bits are just like more jokes. You know, my team's like, wasn't an appropriate time for a joke. And my answer is always, but that was not the case, it turned out from the professionals.
Great as a defense mechanism, but perhaps not as. So yeah, I really loved, also how humor can really show like the depth of the relationships too. Because there was one moment that I remember so clearly, like where um, the the two boys are trying to get Kala to agree to something, and she is livid. She is absolutely so angry with them, but then one of them just like wields a SpongeBob joke at like the exact right moment, and it's like, oh dang, like you know how to like disarm me, but also like it's like a reminder of shared history and the love underneath it, you know?
Yeah, and that's the most annoying and heartwarming thing about siblings is even when you dislike them, they can know you so, so well. And they know all of those buttons to push, whether they want to get under your skin or when they want you to lighten up or manipulate you. You're just easy prey for someone who has that kind of history about you.
Mm. And they're like the easiest people to hurt, like interpersonally too, because like that love is there. Like you can't really have that same effect with like a barb like that on somebody who that connection isn't there with. So yeah, I just really love how the relationships just feel so real and the perspectives are all woven together so beautifully. And it's such a great novel. Thank you so much for coming and talking about it with us.
Thank you so much for reading. And yeah, I hope that as people read, listen to your sister, they're eating snacks, they're having a good time. I hope they're able to laugh and I hope they're able to look at, folks in whoever's in your sphere, whether that is an actual sibling or someone who feels like family to you, the next time they aggravate you and you want to put them into a volcano, you can also, remember that there's maybe some love there, even if it's not always manifesting in the correct way.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a lovely reminder, I think, of you know, having grace for the people that you love in your life too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think having grace for yourself, we are so hard on ourselves. Sometimes, I get into these feedback loops where I'm like, I would never verbalize these things to another person. And I wouldn't even talk to my dog, in this tone of voice when I'm reflecting on the mistakes that I've made. But yeah, when it comes to other people, we just can sometimes have this endless capacity to tend them and help lighten things for them. But when it comes to ourselves, we're held to this really, really high standard. And so I hope, Listen to Your Sister also helps readers think a little bit more kindly of themselves, the choices that they've made, the people that they are, the people that they want to be.
Yes, thank you. That's really lovely. I do have one more question, which is always my last question, which is what's on the horizon for you? Do you think you will keep writing horror, or like what are you looking at here?
Well, to be fair, Jen, I did move to the woods. I was like, don't nobody ask me anything, okay? I'm so stressed and tired,
Yeah.
like a lot of people. And I would love to write something other than horror, but it seems like for the foreseeable future, I will only be writing horror because of how horrifying everything continues to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm really glad I get to read more horror from you. Although I also hope I could maybe read like, a rom-com one day when when things look better. So thank you again. This has been really great.
Thank you so much. And yes, you can expect more horror. You can expect more jokes. You can expect more, you know, heartwarming relationships that go down a dark path and then maybe swivel around. Who knows?
Absolutely, all good things. Okay, listeners, it's now on you. Pick up Listen to Your Sister. By the time that you hear this, it will be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library, wherever you like to get your books. All right, it is time to close this chapter. Goodbye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.